For years, I thought freedom was something that you earned. Work hard, buy the house, get the nicer truck, fill the garage, take the vacations, keep moving up. That's what success was supposed to look like. But somewhere along the way, I stopped asking myself a simple question. Who was all of this really for? Because the truth is, by the time I was 51 years old, I wasn't building a life anymore. I was maintaining one. And I had no idea that I was trapped. When my marriage ended, I thought losing everything was going to be the hardest part. Walking away from a $500,000 house, the shop, the vehicles, the life that I'd spent years building. I thought that's what was going to break me. It wasn't. The hardest part was realizing how terrified I was of having nothing. Not because I needed all that stuff, but because somewhere along the way, I had convinced myself that all of that stuff was my life. And I think a lot more people are living that than they'll ever admit. People talk about debt all the time, but I don't think debt is the real problem. It's a problem, but it's not the real problem. I've met people with no debt whatsoever, and they're running just as hard as the guy with 5 maxed out credit cards. Because the hamster wheel doesn't disappear just because the payments do. You've still got the bigger home to maintain, the bigger yard to mow, the bigger house to clean, the boat to maintain, the camper sitting in storage, the new truck that has to stay shiny, maintained, and paid for. The image you've spent 20 years creating or more. And every bit of it quietly whispers, don't stop, don't slow down, don't lose me. So you keep running. Not because you're happy, but because you're afraid of what happens if you stop. And I don't think we're born believing any of this. I think that we're taught. Commercials, social media, neighbors, coworkers, even people who love us. Success gets measured by what people can see. Bigger, newer, more expensive. And we just call it keeping up with the Joneses. The funny thing is, half of the Joneses are exhausted too. They're just better at hiding it. I know, because I lived it. I worked overtime, worked weekends, thought one more raise, one more purchase, one more milestone would finally make me feel like I'd arrived. But every time I got there, the finish line moved. There was always another thing, another payment, another upgrade, another expectation. I wasn't buying freedom. I was buying responsibilities. Then, life made the decision for me. I lost pretty much everything. Not because I wanted to, not because I woke up one morning dreaming about living in an old camper. It happened. And I'll be honest, I was scared to death. Not knowing where I was going, not knowing how I was going to make it, wondering if I'd completely destroyed my future. That fear was real. For 6 months I lived out of my pickup truck. Then I spent a year living in a cheap old camper. And eventually I bought this 10 acres with the old single wide mobile home on it. But if you'd have told me that one day I'd be happy living there, I would have laughed at you. Because I thought happiness came from climbing higher, not letting go. But something happened that I never expected. The more things that disappeared, the lighter I felt. Not immediately. At first it hurt. It felt like failure. But little by little, I realized I wasn't spending every waking hour taking care of things anymore. They didn't own me anymore. I wasn't spending weekends fixing, mowing, cleaning, organizing, upgrading. I started spending time actually living. And people ask me all the time, how do you live on, $1,800 a month? And I think they're asking the wrong question. The question isn't how do you live on so little? The question is, how much do you really need before your life belongs to you again? Those are two completely different questions. Today, I don't own nearly what I used to. I don't have the biggest house. I don't have a fancy lifestyle. But you know what I do have? I'm able to sleep. I laugh more. My blood pressure is normal. My anxiety is gone. And I wake up looking forward to the day instead of wondering how I'm going to survive it. I have peace. And I honestly don't know what kind of a price tag you can put on that. You know what surprised me the most? It wasn't learning how little I could live on. It was realizing how much of my fear had been imaginary. For years, I told myself, I can't leave. I can't start over. I've got too much to lose. But what I was really saying was, I've built a life that's too expensive to change. There's a big difference in that. And I think a lot of people are living there right now. Not because they love the life they're living, but because they've convinced themselves that they can't afford another one. Maybe that's financially. Maybe it's emotionally. Maybe it's just the fear of what everyone else would think. So they stay. They keep going to the job they dread. They keep pretending everything's fine. They keep buying things they don't need because that's what successful people are supposed to do. And they keep chasing the next promotion, the next raise, the next new truck, the next bigger house, the next vacation they can post online. Oh boy. Not because it makes them happy, but because somewhere along the way, we were taught that that's what success was supposed to look like. Truth is, most people aren't really keeping up with the Joneses. They're trying to keep up with an image. And images are expensive, not just financially, but mentally, emotionally, spiritually. The hamster wheel doesn't stop because the payments stop. It keeps spinning as long as your possessions, your obligations, and everyone else's expectations are deciding how you live your life. I'm not trying to tell anybody to sell everything they own. That's not the point. Some people genuinely enjoy the house they built, the boat that they worked for, the businesses that they created. There's nothing wrong with that. But the question is much simpler. Do you own your possessions or do they own you? Answer that. If tomorrow your job disappeared, would your whole life collapse? If you wanted to leave, could you? Or have you built a life that's so expensive that freedom isn't even an option anymore? Those are hard questions. And I had to answer those myself. Looking back, the thing that I feared the most, starting over with almost nothing, ended up giving me something that I had been chasing my entire adult life. It wasn't money, not success, not status, but peace. And here's the irony. I spent decades believing I needed more to finally be happy. It wasn't until I had less that I finally understood what enough felt like. Maybe that's the biggest lie I ever believed. Not that money mattered, but that more always meant better. Sometimes more is just heavier. And sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is stop running long enough to ask yourself whether the life you're chasing is actually the life you want. Y'all, food for thought. I'll see you in the next one.